celebrating success, learning from legends, and growing poppies. This is Tall Poppy Talk with Grace Lewis. Kia ora and welcome to Tall Poppy Talk. Today we have Sari Davidson. She is an entrepreneur, an industry leader, and an innovator. To just give her a few adjectives today. Founding BooginHead from her kitchen table back in 2005, Sari went on to lead as a CEO and chief for 17 years and built what became a multi-million-dollar business. She was picking up major retail distribution, including some classics like Babies R Us, Walmart, Target. She led on all fronts, from comprehensive business management to international expansion. All this and more is what led to her successful exit of the business earlier this year with a lovely acquisition from Infantino. Sari is an industry expert. She is renowned and known for driving business growth, leading cross-functional teams, and creating innovative product strategies. Another endeavor, as if she had the time, but another endeavor where Sari excelled was her ability to propel both people and businesses within her various roles, such as recruiter and HR manager. One very notable position was when she spent just shy of 5 years at Microsoft before ultimately taking the full-time leap with her exponentially growing business, which I'm sure we'll get into. Now, Sari is a well-sought-after product and business development consultant. She is a collaborative leader, remarkable mum, CPG expert, and an advocate. It is a real pleasure, and I give you the warmest welcome today to Tall Poppy Talk. My first question is, where and how are you today?
Well, thank you, Grace. After that introduction, I'm fantastic. Who doesn't want to hear amazing things about themselves? And I am coming to you from Bellevue, Washington, right outside of Seattle.
Seattle? I've been once, and it was the most beautiful place. Before that, I only knew of it from, honestly, the Twilight series where they talk about it. A lot of my listenership are from the US, but heaps are in New Zealand. Right now, kind of start of August, what's the weather like? What makes you want to be in Seattle?
Well, people want to be in Seattle right now because the summer is where it's at. We get 3 amazing months a year. And I tell you, when the sun is out in Seattle and the water is sparkling, there just is no other place to be. So typically, Seattleites do not leave Seattle in the summer. So people tend to stay around and really enjoy the summer. And then in the winter, they go to places like New Zealand and to take their travel. So it's actually stunning out right now.
And as someone who has just, like I said, successfully exited and made that transition after 17 years,
right,
where when you are leading something that is your baby, which BooginHead is, did you enjoy summers? I don't know. Is it a little sweeter this year that you're can kind of enjoy it? Is that a weird question?
Actually, it's an interesting question. I think my answer will surprise you. So typically, I refer to BooginHead as like my middle child. So I have 2 boys, and I birthed BooginHead in between my oldest and my youngest child. So BooginHead is the middle child, that with all the things that come along with being a middle child. And typically, BooginHead in the summers was our downtime, thankfully. It was this time where after we heard what was going to be going into the major retailers, and we were just in manufacturing mode, and I would always encourage my team to take time off, to work from home before COVID, to get outside and enjoy the summer. And so summers for me, while at BooginHead, were typically my favorite time of year because it was the most relaxed time. Actually, this summer has felt really different because although I've exited, and that's really exciting and amazing, what my next steps is very unclear to me. What am I going to do next? And so there's been a little less just sort of, relaxing, and a little bit more hustling to kind of internally figure out what I'm going to go do.
Oh, well, and thank you. I think a big part of that, right, is identity. And I talk about it a lot with guests. And sometimes it's really easy to label, if you have an athlete or if you have an entrepreneur, you have a business leader, you're a CEO, right? That is your thing. that is your identity. So when you do exit and you're into that next phase, it's like, oh, what do I say in my elevator pitch when people say, tell me about yourself? Is that all part of it too right now?
Those are such major themes for me right now in my like internal voice in my head of fear and doubt and, who's going to hire somebody that's been working for themselves for 17 years and, all the things that go along with that. So, yeah, it's an interesting time inside my head on a daily basis.
And that's why it's such a gift, honestly, to do this podcast right now, because in a year's time, you'll listen back and be like, oh my goodness, you had no idea what A, B, and C was going to happen. And that's what I love. The podcast too serves as like a time capsule for me and for a lot of guests. And taking it back, what was this inception idea for the business? Could you please share about that initial inception to a viable business venture and what motivated you? I know that's like 3 encompassing questions, but please take that how you wish.
I grew up in a very entrepreneurial home. So my mom started her business when I was 14, which was new, used, and collectible bookstores. And so I watched my mom work 7 days a week, getting up at 5 a.m. on Saturdays to go to garage sales to try and, buy these like timeless books and things for her store. My dad has worked for himself as an executive coach for a very long time now. My brother is a successful writer and works in the entertainment industry. And as I was growing up, my parents always said to me, you will always earn more working for yourself than you will for someone else. So it was always instilled in me that wasn't as scary of an avenue, right? And so when I had, I had a recruiting company for a short period of time. I was a recruiter by trade and I kind of went out on my own. So I was already sort of familiar with, entrepreneurship. And so in 2005, I had a 1-year-old who is now, by the way, 20, and I'm moving him into his fraternity house next week at San Diego State. But he was 1 and he was trying to hold a sippy cup, and a sippy cup for a 1-year-old, it's hard to hold on to it. And it just kind of kept falling to the ground and I kept picking it up. And, pretty soon we were in the stroller and he was throwing it out of the stroller or the car seat. And it was just one of those, there has to be a product out there that solves this problem. And so I went to the major retailers. I went online. I didn't find what I needed. And it never occurred to me to just leave it there. I basically went to Target, bought an $80 sewing machine, sat down at my kitchen table with backpack strap nylon material, which is not at all what it turned out to be, and just started sewing samples and handing it out to my mom group friends. And it was from those friends that they, kind of gave me the, oh, well, it would be great if it, had this element or that element. And I sort of refined it. And it was just one of those things where I will always have this internal drive to do something myself. I think I have worked for other people like Microsoft and it was fantastic. And I would 100% do that again if the opportunity was right. But I'm a highly competitive person. So for me in my brain, it was like, well, I don't want to sit here while somebody else does it. Right. So I want to do it. But at the time I was a young mom. I was working for someone else at the time. And I had this opportunity come up. I created a little website. So people were I did a small run, through, somebody that helped me do it. It was like I had a few pieces. I had a website and people were just very small, randomly buying it. And then Microsoft came calling. And, it was just such an exceptional opportunity. I was recruited to work in their entertainment and devices division and to build a division that was brand new, that had a code name. It turned out to be the Zoom division, which was a iPod rival that's no longer around, but it was a very, very cool startup environment. They relocated me from California to Seattle. And so I put my project on hold. which was called Sippy Grip because that was the very first name of the product. And then about a year after I was at Microsoft, I had that itch again, like, I wonder what if I did something with this. And it just so happened that all during the course of like this 1 week, I had like 3 random people buy the product that didn't know me. Like it was like Florida, Texas, and just like random people on the internet. And I got a call from a girlfriend of mine that I grew up with that was like, listen, Oprah is doing this contest, this like QVC contest, and I think you should go and try out for it with your product. And I kind of hemmed and hawed, and she was like, listen, when I wanted to try and go into, acting or, what she was wanting to do, you really pushed me to do it. So I'm going to push you to kind of like take this leap. And so I flew to LA on vacation for Microsoft with my Sippy Grip. I stood in a really long line, and the QVC person kind of came around to me and she was like, this isn't a high enough price point for us, but you've got something here. And I could totally see this on the shelf of Baby's R Us, and I think you should pursue it. And like, that was the moment that I went, okay. That was like January 2007. And I went, all right, I'm going to do something with this. I'm very much of somebody that believes in kind of like universe moments and, that sort of thing. And so it was in January of 2007, 2 years after I sat down initially at my kitchen table, that I went, all right, I'm going to like try and see if this thing really has legs. And that was, and I was still at Microsoft, and that is when I kind of really started my journey with BooginHead.
Thank you, because I had read about it and we've briefly spoken about it before, but what I love there is like 2 years can sound now so quick. Like, oh, I started it in 2005 and then really did it in 2007, but that's actually a long time to keep chipping away at it, to let it pause, let it marinate. And the 2 parts I love there is you had an advocate, your friend, because you had been an advocate for them.
Right.
It was like, no, go do this. And then there is such a joy when like an external person who doesn't, like, for lack of a better word, care about you says, hey, no, this actually has value.
Yes.
Pursue it. Because that is the imposter syndrome stuff starts coming in where you're like, oh, is this just my friends and family who are supporting it? And so as much as you love their support, when you get like that external support, it feels really good.
Yes, 100%. And so the other kind of pivotal moment that happened within that was that while I was waiting in line for the QVC, I mean, it was a very long, think about an open call for an Oprah QVC thing, right? It was like at the LA Convention Center, massive lines. You're waiting in line for hours and hours just to get like that one moment. And all of the people that were there was this one woman that was standing next to me in line, and we had, several hours together, and she happened to also have a baby product. And she was the one that told me about a trade show that I should go to, and like walked me through the whole thing. And it was at that trade show that I launched the business and that I was approached by Target at that trade show. And so had I not been in line next to that very person doing that very thing, those pieces wouldn't have come together and the whole thing maybe never would have taken off. So it is interesting how, just things that you think are coincidences can really catapult an entire, multi-decade of your life.
Absolutely. And even ones like, I genuinely believe you would have got there anyway. Like that lineup would have happened in a coffee shop this time. Like something would have happened at another time because that persistence, but it is, the universe giving these little, like, keep going little crumbs. And we even have discussed this before, like with me with the podcast. For those listening, we're on a new platform, which is exciting. And I'm a year and a half in and now deciding like, okay, no, I want to invest. I want to put more into it. And sometimes you can't even explain why. And for me, it was a previous guest saying, hey, this is great, give it some more. And you need those people who push you, but it's all about the intention behind it.
Yes.
I love, and something we had discussed in a pre-call to this was, and I would love it if you could share about in the investing in yourself, and you talked about the like 1-800 number that you had. Would you
Oh,
mind sharing about that?
so when I first started, and honestly, it was the same 1-800 number throughout the entire time I had BooginHead. You know, my dad growing up was always like, um, dress for the part that you want. You know, don't let them see you sweat. Like, fake it till you make it. You know, sort of stuff. And so one of the first things I did was I got a PO box mailing address, so it wasn't my home address. And I signed up for one of those like online 1-800 numbers for my business to roll into. And with those, you have the option, you can record a message and you can have, you know, up to 5 extensions. And so I did like for customer service, extension 1, for accounting, extension 2. And I was the only one that was answering all of those. They were all coming to my cell phone because I was the only employee. And I wasn't even on payroll. So I wasn't even an employee at the time, right? But you know, when somebody calls in for customer service and they press 1 and you pick up the phone, like it sounds very professional and it sounds very big, right? So I wanted to kind of portray that I had this company, that it was bigger than it was, because I think that, you know, retailers, they're not going to bring you on if they think you're one person sitting in your house, right? So they want to make sure you have the infrastructure and, you know, all the things. So that was sort of my way of doing it.
Thank you. I loved that when you told me it the first time, and I love it now. It's a saying one of my coaches said, and I've mentioned it before on the podcast, is champions act like champions well before they become champions. And
Yeah,
right now we have the Olympics. It's a prime thing. Like,
yeah,
there are some athletes who for the first time are competing or getting
right,
gold or medaling, but that doesn't make them suddenly an Olympic level athlete. Like, all the work leading up to it, it's now the title matches what they were already doing.
yes,
So for you with your business, as it did grow, it wasn't like you hit a certain mark when you got into Target
right,
and now you're
right,
worthy of Target. No, you
right,
were worthy of it, and then that recognition matched up.
right. Although I will say there was a lot of, so I was working at Microsoft while building my company, and it was only me, right? So for 3 years, on nights and weekends. And by the way, in between, or, you know, in 2008, so I launched in September 2007. In February 2008, I had my second child. So I was pregnant when I launched the company. And while I was on maternity leave, I got the call that I was picked up by Babies R Us. And so but I had this, and you know, it's sort of that internal dialogue, and we talk about imposter syndrome and all those things. I had this sort of narrative in my head of, if I can just get into Babies R Us, I've made it. If I can get into Target, I've made it. If I got this, if I am at this much revenue, I've made it. But the line kept moving, right? And so, you know, you sort of have this idea in your head when you first start out of like what making it feels like. And one of the things I said to you offline, is that, you know, there were many times where I was like, you know, I gave myself this title of CEO, right? And just like I gave myself the 1-800 number, but it doesn't mean that I always felt like I was a CEO or worthy of that. Even, you know, I knew inside I wasn't as big as the 1-800 number showed me to be, right? And so I think that with people that have, you know, imposter syndrome and the tall poppy syndrome, it's like that marker and that line kind of keeps moving, you know, internally, and you're constantly sort of chasing.
And as your team expanded, you're
Mm-hmm.
leading people, like you're employing people, you are their boss. Like, there's all of that factoring in too. And something that I think is really remarkable, and your relationships stand testament to it. The people you did bring onto the team is why there was that exponential
Yes,
growth. So
yes,
something that other entrepreneurs or just people, period, are probably wondering is like, what are the values and traits when you were looking to build the successful team?
mm-hmm.
What was it that you were like, yep, I see A, B, or C, and we're good. What did you look for?
So I will say that my recruiting and HR background really lent itself to being able to hire people. I mean, thankfully I had that experience, so I felt really confident just in knowing how to do that in the first place. But the second is that I am a very firm believer in hiring for somebody's DNA. Obviously, if you're looking for somebody to do a very specific job, like for example, my controller had to have that kind of accounting experience, right? Like that, that's a one-to-one. But I often took chances on people that maybe didn't have as much experience, but that my gut told me that they would be a right fit with my culture, that they were somebody that was going to think outside the box, that they were going to be all hands on deck, that they were going to enjoy being in a small environment. And I just really am such a believer in, I very much listen to my gut. I have not at times in my life, and it has not gone well for me. And so I've really over the years learned to trust it. And you really need to have that when you're hiring people, is you got to trust your gut and be like, this person's going to grow and be part of the team. So for example, it took me a while, but I finally really brought on like a true marketing person. And she had some good experience, but she hadn't been in my industry. Her experience was more in kind of grocery store, sort of, internal to like high-end grocery stores. But I just knew that there was something about her. And she was with me for over 5 years through the sale. She's actually coming over in about 2 hours because she's going to help me write my book because she's so flippin' talented. But she made such a massive impact in my business. She created the philanthropy program. She got our TikTok from 0 to almost 2 million. Like there were so many things that we reached because of her. My creative director was my pledge sister from college, from my sorority. And she was doing freelance. She'd never done packaging before. She was more like graphic design. And she was with me for over 15 years and did product design. I mean, some of our most amazing products came from her brain. And so, my controller started as my bookkeeper, right? And so it's just, I really believe in hiring people that you feel are smarter than you and then getting out of their way and letting them do their job and letting them thrive. Because if you give them that window to be kind of almost their own entrepreneur within your company, they will bring so much to the table. But I have had experiences where I have hired people based off of just truly like experience, and it doesn't like give me the return on investment as much as when I really go with somebody that I just think from like a DNA standpoint is going to really, it's not a 9 to 5 for them. Like they're going to be living and breathing and really believe in what we're doing.
That is great advice across the board. And I think too, what you mentioned there about like that 9 to 5, having people, and I know I flourish when I'm in an environment where I take responsibility for it and it feels personal, because I'm curious your thoughts. I don't agree with the whole thing of like, it's business, it's not personal. I spend significant hours in my day, in my week, in my life with what I do for work. I would hope that I'm not like compartmentalizing to the point that I don't identify with it. Like it is a part of me. It's part of what I spend a lot of my time doing. You want to take pride in it. So I hope that like when I'm hired, right, it's like, she's going to flourish, she's going to take responsibility and she's going to care about it. And it sounds like that's what you were looking for too, is people who want it to work for their own reasons as well as feed into why you want it to succeed.
It is a very fine line as a leader. And sometimes I look back and I go, I should have maybe been more of a leader and less of a like for peer or personal at times. I went through a lot of tumultuous things in the 17 years that I was doing the business. And, but I do think that, it is, I want to be an environment. I care about the people I work with, right? And I want to know that they're okay, and I want to, meet their partners and kids and all that sort of stuff. And so the beauty of creating your own business is that you can do it whichever way you want, right? Like you get to create the environment that you want to be in, and what will happen is that you will attract people that want to be in that environment, and it becomes very clear. So what I did during my interview process was I obviously interviewed them, and then they maybe interviewed with the person that they, maybe if they weren't working with me directly, like if they were reporting to somebody else or whatever. And then what I did was I brought them back and I put them in a room with my entire team, and I left. And I said, I want you to talk to them about what it's really like to work here, what it's really like to work for me, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. Like put it out all on the table. And I wanted the candidate to ask all the questions they were afraid to ask, because I wanted people to come in with eyes wide open. We were not a perfect culture. We were always grossly underfunded because we didn't have any outside capital. Everything was a shoestring. And so it does took a certain personality to be able to thrive in that environment. And so having everybody be involved with the hire and having that hire really get the lowdown was an important part of like building my culture.
And it's expectations, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
no one comes into it at that point surprised or expecting something different. And often I'm forgetting my train of thought, but it's to do with expectations. Like that's when disappointment falls through, and avoiding that across the board is critical to then efficient like integration moving. And I think that applies for business as well as just like general relationships, right? Is if you go into it understanding what the other person and what you expect. And we've touched upon it a little bit, but I want to really dive into the topic of imposter syndrome and then the tall poppy syndrome. And we, especially as I said with non-Kiwi or Australian guests, always give them a bit of a heads up. But please, could you share like your definition of tall poppy syndrome as there's no right or wrong answer, and then how you feel like you've experienced it?
Before I met you, I literally had no idea. I love the name. I think it's adorable, and it's funny how it's related to what I think the definition is. But the way in which I have thought about it is tall poppy syndrome is more of an external, and imposter syndrome is more of an internal dialogue. So to me, tall poppy syndrome is you've got somebody who is succeeding, who's rising, within their field or doing great things. And external factors, whether that's, society or, other people come and kind of like chop it off at the head and sort of externally sort of like push them back down. Whereas to me, imposter syndrome is that internal negative voice, which every entrepreneur has that I know, and I've certainly been experiencing it as of late, which is like that negative internal dialogue of like, I'm not qualified to be called CEO, like they're going to find me out, that sort of thing. That's the way that I've looked at it. So am I thinking about the tall poppy syndrome correctly?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's interesting how you say like now the imposter syndrome is more. I would be curious, like, is it because this past 17 years you've seen success, you've seen growth, so like you can run and lead a business, and as we talked about with that identity, as now it's the imposter syndrome of like, can I do that again? Like other people asking questions, you're like, was it a fluke? I don't know.
So I think it's all of those things, right? I mean, again, like the amount of time that I did BooginHead is longer than any relationship I've had in my life, literally. That's like an internal joke with my friends and I. Like I was married for less time than I had my business, and it is older than my youngest child. And it is something that I learned as I went. And so I was fairly confident a lot of the time of some of the like the cycles we would go through, how to prepare to meet with a retailer, how to pitch them, how to figure out how much to charge, all of those, how to bring the product in, how to distribute it out. Like those were things that just over time, I just did over and over and over and over again. So I felt fairly confident about that within my world, right? Of my products, my contacts, what have you. Now I am no longer the CEO of BooginHead, right? And I am in this transition phase where I'm working for the company that acquired BooginHead in a role that is very different than what I did as owner. It's actually been a fantastic experience. They have been wonderful to me. But that contract is ending December 31st. And so I'm sort of in the space of like internal dialogue of what am I qualified to do? What do I want to do? Like who, if I go to work for somebody else, which is definitely appealing, I will say, who's going to hire me? Will they think that I have the skills that I feel like I have? All of that internal dialogue has really kind of spun up because I'm in such a transition. Whereas when you're in it and you're at BooginHead and you're not expecting that it's going to end in a year, you can look a year ahead and be like, okay, a year from now, I'll still be in Walmart. I'll be, creating new products. I'll be like, it's just like any other business. There's cycles, right? The summer's the manufacturing, the fall you're pitching. Like you kind of know what the cadence is. And right now I'm not in a cadence of anything at all. And I have I was going through the process of selling as my son was leaving for college for the first time. I turned 50 and sold my business within 30 days of each other. And I've been sort of in a role that I've not ever done before. And the contract is ending in December. And I'm kind of looking ahead going, I don't even know. But what I'm trying to look at it as is kind of that feeling you have when you graduate college of like, the world is my oyster. Like, what do I want to do? Because I am qualified for a lot of things and I have proven myself. And so I'm sort of trying to like change the narrative and look at it as like, well, let's reinvent, what do you want the second half of your life to look like? And so I know I can accomplish that. I built a business. I supported myself and my sons. I have a beautiful life from that. I exited. And so like, instead of putting it out in the hands of somebody else or of that negative self-talk, I'm looking and changing the narrative and saying, well, what do I want to do? Because I know that in life, I've always found a way to make things happen, always. And so I just need to get more focused on what that thing is so that I've got like that line of sight to go in. And I'm like a bull in a china shop. Like I've often been told I'm like a dog with a bone. Like I just will not give up and keep going. So I'm trying to harness that energy and push aside that kind of imposter syndrome talk, that tall poppy kind of talk in my head.
Yes, thank you. And I'm like smiling, excited listening because these are conversations I actually have had a lot. And my mum, who listens, shout out, she also.
Hi, Mom.
Hi, Pauline. We had this conversation because I listened to a epic podcast with Jane Fonda, and Jane Fonda in it talks about when she was 62, she entered what she called like her third act. It's like her third thing.
I listened to that podcast. She is amazing. She's like my idol.
No, seriously. And I'm like so grateful that I'm 25 and I get to hear this because she says like in it, I think when she was 62, she got a divorce and heaps of her friends were like, why would you do that? And she was like, I'm hoping I have a good 20, 30 years. Like that's a freaking long time.
Exactly.
And seeing it as like, okay, well, what's next? So that was one part that both me and my mum adored. I sent her and she listened to it and loved it. And then I had another guest on the podcast, Grace Prendergast, and she was an Olympic rower, gold, silver medals in Tokyo. And then she's like, okay, I'm ready to see what else I'm good at.
Right.
Because she's like, I know I'm really, really good at rowing. Literally the best at rowing. And she's like, what else am I good at? I don't know, because I haven't, much like you, dog with the bone. She's like, if I'm in something, I'm in it. So now that I have the opportunity to not be doing that thing anymore, what else can I excel at? And it's a simple way of changing the narrative that goes from
Right.
like, what if I'm only good at this one thing to like, I've only
Exactly.
really done that one thing. What else can I be good at? And like you excelled in recruiting, then with the business. So
Yep.
now it's like, not only do you have the opportunity to see what else you're good at, you have all these skills that you've like
Hmm.
refined.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that Sari of like 2005
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
starting would be like, oh my goodness, who is that woman? Like,
Well, 100%. And I'm a very self-reflective person. I always have been. And I've done a lot of um, personal growing in the past 5 years in particular. I put a lot of time and effort into working on myself. Really started, right about when COVID started is when that path started for me. And as I have also, exited the business and really closed things down, I've also done a lot of self reflection on what was I good at in that business and where could I be better in the future, and also identifying and owning there everybody has superpowers, everyone. And there are a couple things that I know I are absolutely 100% my superpowers. And it's also because I like doing them, right? Like for example, one of them is I am a great salesperson. Like I don't want to be just a salesperson. And there's nothing wrong with being just a salesperson. It's just that there's lots of other things I like doing around it. But I do have a natural talent when I'm passionate about something. Like I love being in front of that client and pitching it and closing that deal. Like that, fires me up. I also am very good with relationship building. And that kind of goes along with sales, right? But there are also things I'm really not good at, and recognizing those as well. Because back when I was in HR, my theory always was, why are we trying to get this person to do something that isn't, they don't have a natural talent for? Why wouldn't we let them do what they're really good at and hire somebody else that has that natural talent where they have a gap? And like, let's let everyone thrive. And so I've done a lot of self reflection of like, where do I thrive? What lights me up? Where do I really succeed? And I really had to take a hard look at myself. My dad is an executive coach, and he is bringing me through a coaching program. And he went and interviewed 5 people that worked for me. They were confidential interviews, and he asked a series of questions. And from that came positive and negative things, right? And the negative and the constructive, maybe not negative, were all things I already knew about myself. But to see them kind of in print, I was like, these are other people kind of saying them. Like, I want to be better at this, right? And so I think that taking a hard look at yourself in the mirror as a leader and always being open to growing and being better. Just because you're the boss and the leader doesn't mean that you're doing it right. It doesn't mean that it's working. And so making changes along the way, whether you're 25 or 50 or 62, like I think everybody should always be looking like to grow and like what is their next act.
yes, yes, yes. And on that too, what I love is like, I think often when there is negative, constructive, whatever we want to, we all get the gist. It's like,
Right,
instead of getting super emotive about it, because it's
right,
important to be emotional, it means you're invested, you care, but like,
right.
is there a point? That's how I try to interpret it. Is like, especially so I was a rower and
Mm-hmm.
we get critique
Right.
constantly, or coaching is another word for it. But a lot of the time we're just trained to take that emotion out of it,
Mm-hmm.
because then it's like, all right, well, what's the technical changes? What are they actually saying? How can I improve? And it does take a lot of practice. There's no like silver bullet of like, this is how you don't take things personally. You should take it personally, but it's like, what can I actually learn and take away from that? So I think that's awesome that you're doing that course, and having someone guide you through it
Mm-hmm.
is like just fantastic, because self reflection is huge, but there is a real advantage if you can interact with it well when external
Right.
people bring it up. Because,
Yes.
as you
And
said,
feedback is a gift. I believe feedback is a gift. It is. something that's very hard for other people to give because they're afraid to give constructive feedback. Everybody wants to give the positive and the affirmation, but it is a gift when you are also given the constructive feedback, right? And so, some people kind of shy away from it. There are some managers or CEOs that they don't ever do that. And that person doesn't know what they're doing wrong or doesn't grow because they're not giving it to them. But as a boss and as a CEO and as a leader, you don't get it very often because your team is not always likely to come to you and give you feedback. I did get some good. I mean, I would solicit it, at times, but I also, it was sort of an internal joke. There were some things that I'm just not good at. I'm not the person I'm the person that transposes numbers when I'm doing spreadsheets or whatever. I don't know all the formulas to the spreadsheet. So, it was sort of like this joke. It was like, Sari, you are fired. You're not allowed to touch that. You can look at it, but it's locked. You're not allowed to put your cursor inside of that spreadsheet whatsoever. So I hired people to fill the gap of where I knew that I wasn't going to thrive.
And that too is part of high performance. You had a high performing team.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious, knowing that this is a kind of dynamic question that will change in a year, but how do you in this moment define high performance?
High performance is I actually think let's take out that they're doing their job well, because that should be a baseline of anyone in any job, right? To me, that's not high performing. Everybody should be just do your job, right? So let's take that out. To me, high performing is somebody that brings new value to the business and to the role without being asked. So they come to you and they say, I have an idea for a new program, a new product, a new way of doing things, a new process. I've thought this through. This is how I think we could do it. And I think I can make it happen with some help. Here's what I need to go do it. They are actively and proactively helping make the business better, more efficient, more successful. They're invested. They're not somebody who, if there's an emergency and it's after 5 p.m., that they're, not going to respond or what have you. And that to me is a high performing person, somebody who when somebody is engaged with the business and with the role and when they're just plugging in and plugging out. I've had employees that just clock in and clock out. And there is just such a dramatic difference between those two types of people. So when I say, when I'm hiring and I'm looking for that DNA, the DNA that I'm looking for is that high performing. It's somebody who, for example, I'm just, my biggest fear in life, honestly, is being average, just floating through life and being average, right? So for me, I'm going to want to be great at everything that I do. Or honestly, I'd rather fail miserably and go, okay, that's not for me, and move it aside. But I don't want to be in this middle range. I want to be up here. So even, the position I'm in now, I'm a consultant, I'm a contract. They acquired me. They've been fantastic to me, and they, asked me to do things and fly here and do whatever, and I'm happy to do all of it. And there was this period of time, it was about a week, where they flew their entire office to their headquarters in San Diego, and I was not invited. And I was sitting at my desk, first thinking I was probably getting fired because I was not part of the team or whatever, and then having a little pity party for myself that my feelings were kind of hurt too, right? Because I was super invested in I was right in the mix of making things happen. And I sat there and I thought, well, what can I do with my time? I could clock out and go take a vacation for a week, or I could do what I know needs to be done, but they haven't quite gotten there yet in their head, which is they needed a go forward plan. They needed a strategy of how to take my business and the products, the particular products, and how were they going to decide which one stayed, which one goes, which retailers were they in, what, aggregated all together. And so I took that week and I put together a go forward strategy for them. And that to me is the type of person that I would want to work with, which is left to their own devices, they're still thinking about it and they're taking the initiative and doing something about it versus going, oh, well, I don't have any meeting on my calendar this afternoon, so I'm just going to clock out and go watch, TV or what. So to me, that's what a high performing person and team. Not to like give myself I don't know why I used my own example. I probably should have used a former employee, but it was like the most recent one I could think of. I am an employee right now. I am an employee, so.
Yes, no, and that's a great exercise, I think, too, because that is what, in this podcast, the Tall Poppies, you, my guests, are high performers. And what's so amazing is this different interpretation and what defines a high performer in different industries. Like there's some, often I'll go back to sport because it's like my safe space. It's really easy to determine who's the highest performing because they tend to be the fastest or they won. There's like really easy metrics.
Yeah.
But something like business, especially when you're a leader, building a new business space, like there's no go-to. Right. There's no like, solution that is known. You have to develop a solution that could potentially be done 3 different ways. High performing means something different in your world versus someone else's. And part you said there, which I had to smirk at, was when you said like someone just doing their job is base, because I'm pretty new into my career and I have like really wonderful managers who've supported me. And in one of my end of year reviews, I'd put myself as a 5 out of 5 for something. And of course, right? Because I had been a junior and then I had gotten a promotion during the year and it was awesome. But essentially I was told like, okay, you were a 5 for a junior, but you're just a 3 for an AE because that's why you got that promotion. So the metrics of measuring you have changed. And I was like, oh, I kind of liked being a big fish in a small pond.
One of the things that I don't know if you've ever talked about on your podcast, but it really comes with this imposter syndrome and the drive and all of that, is that I went through such a long period of time in my life, and I've gotten a lot better with it, especially over the last 5 years, but when is enough enough? So as entrepreneurs, we always want more. Like I said, well, when I get into Biggie's RS, I've made it. When I got into Target and the line keeps moving. And what I found is that spilled over into my personal life. It was always something more, right? And I'm not really a things person. So it wasn't like cars, boats, things like that, but it was just like these internal markers that I had for myself. And, it talking about kind of like self-reflection and things like that is I've done a lot of work and I've worked hard to kind of try and level set, like, does it always have to be the 20%? Do you always have to be in the 20%? At what point are you not enjoying your life because you're always looking at, where else you're going to go or what level you're going to get to and things like that. And so it's a big theme right now when I think about kind of like what my next step is. It doesn't for me have to be the biggest job, the highest salary, the growing the biggest company. It's like, really, what is it that I would do on a day-to-day basis that I would feel happy and fulfilled? Because there's only so much climbing you can do until you sort of, get a little like, well, what else is there? I do think part of that comes with age. And I do think there's a time and a place in life. So when I was your age at 25, I mean, I was just absolutely fierce. Like I was on 100% commission in a recruiting company, outbilling people that had been there, for a decade because I was thirsty and I was just cold calling like crazy and, all the things. And I think that it's different stages of your life and kind of recognizing and knowing like when the right stage is for that. And when it's also okay to just say like, I feel really good about where I am and what I've done. And, maybe that's okay for right now. And maybe I don't need to be over here and maybe I can just enjoy being, at this level right now. So
that is really wonderful. Thank you. Does that feed into ultimately, because I was curious with the exit and being acquired,
Yes.
was that part of it where you were like, I've accomplished so much.
Yeah.
I don't need to keep doing this grind,
Yeah.
like acquisition time.
Yes. 100%. I mean, I think that first of all, I had out aged the product, right? Like my kids were no longer babies, and although I still have a lot of passion for this category in particular, I kind of I felt really ready to like what I actually felt like the industry had changed a lot. So
Yeah.
that's one, is like the retail landscape had changed tremendously. And I think it was just feeling like more of a grind. And I felt like I was in a space where my staying in the business was holding me back
Yep.
from doing what I was really meant to do next. And I had an opportunity, it came up, and talk about kind of like universe and things all felt like the company's located in San Diego, and that's where my son goes to college. So, when I go to their headquarters, I get to see him. It was the former business of my business advisor. Like there were just so many synergies. I had gone through times in the past where we were potentially going to be sold and it never felt quite right. And this felt right. And it was the right time. And I think there is something about like turning 50 and kind of getting to this place where you're like, you're just naturally looking back and going, okay, well, what's the next path? You're just thinking about it in like life paths. So yeah, I was ready. I was really ready to move on, um and I have zero regrets. Like I feel so good about it. I feel so good about who it sold to and what they're doing with it now. And I feel really like I do feel really kind of like out of college excited about what is next for me. It's definitely the scary time because I like structure and I like to like know what's coming next. I like every CEO is type A and we all want control, but it has definitely tested me of like thinking about that like, well, what does it have to be? Does it need to be up here? Does it need to be this like big hairy job that you're working like a crazy person, or could it be like maybe right here and you can do other things outside of it too? So it's helping me kind of redefine that a little bit.
Exactly. It's where you want to get your challenge. And on a more granular, like a micro version of that, I remember when I finished with college, so I was like a D1 athlete, and
Mm-hmm.
sport for so long, fitness was like, it was not fun. It was a job. Like there was
Right.
fun moments, but like I couldn't understand, and I've really worked on it, but like still struggle with, well, how do people exercise? Would people say it was for fun? I was like, I don't get that. Or like they would just go for a leisurely enjoy, and I'm like, you should feel deceased at the end of it. Like you're supposed to be exhausted. Like I didn't, especially because I was a rower. It was like you don't finish rowing sessions and feel like, oh yay, like I could go again. No, like, and so that was something where like for the longest time my challenge had come from physical exertion. And I remember when I was done having to like reestablish my relationship with exercise. I was like, no, this can just be something that you do and it can feel good and you can get endorphins and be done with it. But much like you with any endeavor you're going to do is like, I don't know how to not be full speed.
My biggest challenge because when I get excited about something, I just dive right. And I love exercising, by the way. Like I've always been somebody that loves working out, and for me, it's something I get to do. It's not something I have to do in the
Yeah.
sense of like, I look forward to it. It's like I work out some of my biggest business things while I'm exercising. So I was not an athlete, but I understand 100% what you're saying. And yeah, I think it is like, um, there's different stages of your life of like when to go full throttle and when not. And, yeah, I think my biggest challenge looking forward is not going full throttle in whatever it is that I do. So I that is that it'll be very interesting to watch this podcast or listen to this a year from now and go, okay, that was really good talk, Sari, about like taking your foot off the pedal, and here you are doing, how you have 5 consulting clients and, all the, you're like working 24/7, but I love it. Like my dad is in his late 70s and he's still working. And I feel like that's going to be me in some capacity.
Yeah. And
everybody needs purpose, right? Everybody needs a purpose in their life. And that can look a lot of different ways. That can be a stay-at-home mom. That can be in work. That can be in philanthropy. But I do think everybody needs
purpose.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Now, before my sign-off question.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yes. I was like,
for another hour. You can edit it all out.
I know. I was like, looked at the time. I'm like, oh, okay. Is there something, and I know there's probably a lot, but something I didn't ask you that I should have?
Ooh. This is a very unique podcast in that normally, like when I'm interviewed for something, it is very much all about kind of like the business, right? And tell me about Walmart or tell me about Target and how did you get into this retailer and blah, blah, blah. But there's so much sort of like me as a person involved with it. I don't think there's anything that you didn't ask me. I think that like I would just say that, as I've sort of had a lot of self-reflection, especially since selling the company. And as I was kind of in it and pushing really hard and hiring people and all the things, it's like, I don't think I took in from other people as much when they'd be like, oh my God, you did, this is amazing. And you did it. And it's like, I didn't ever really kind of in that tall poppy sort of imposter syndrome. Like, I wish I would have paused a bit to take it in, let myself like hear it and feel it and experience like, yeah, like give yourself some grace. Like you actually did do this amazing thing or you did accomplish X. And there was a lot of me being like, yes, but, and I need to go do this. And I didn't kind of stop and smell the flowers if you want to get really like whatever about it. And I wish I had done that more because there was a lot of time, there should have been a lot more time to celebrate. And so as I sort of walk into my next venture, which I'm already percolating in my head because I can't help myself, I've literally reserved, I'm not kidding, probably 30 domain names already. But as I sort of walk into this next venture, I've made a commitment to myself that I am going to stop and smell the flowers and like let people's affirmations sort of sink in and own it a little bit more. And that I think does help a little bit with that tall poppy syndrome and with that imposter syndrome. And so that would be like my parting sort of word, I guess.
Thank you. That is beautiful and very on theme, which I appreciate.
Thank you.
Sign-off question is, if there was just one musical artist, in this thing you have to listen to just one musical artist for the rest of your life, who's it going to be?
Well, that's a very easy question for me. So people that know me, I'm gonna give you a visual. You may not know who this is.
I hope I do.
No. But I love Dave Matthews. He's my lover. He lives here in Seattle. So it's funny because my boyfriend's like legitimately worried that we're going to meet one day and he's going to fall hopelessly in love with me because why would he not? People are very split on Dave Matthews. You either love Dave or you hate Dave. It's a little bit of a cult following. And I have loved Dave for many, 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 many years. And every year I go to the Gorge here in Seattle, which is like a 3-day, we call it Labor Day. It's a 3-day event. And this year I'm also traveling to go see him. And his music really speaks to me. And he's really fantastic live. And he's also, the thing that I like about him as an artist is that he's known kind of in the Seattle area as he's just this very low-key guy. He drives just like a regular car. He takes his kids to school when they were going to school. He shops at the local market. Like he's just a regular dude in like a regular house. And so I would say if you all have not given Dave Matthews a chance, like Give him a chance. That's good. That's good.
Amazing. I'm not familiar, so I will be soon.
You're a little young. You're a little young for Dave, but I think maybe now that I have your phone number, I will text you some good thoughts.
Please, yes, I would appreciate that. Me and my manager every couple days will send what the vibe is musically. We'll send playlists. It's a great way to get to know someone when you know their music choice. Yeah. So, Sari Davidson, it has been such a pleasure to have you on Tall Poppy Talk. I cannot wait to see in a year when we do our anniversary episode what's going on in your world. But seriously, thank you, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved it.
Thank you so much for listening to Tall Poppy Talk. We'll see you next time. Feel free to check us out on socials, YouTube, and the website. Thanks for today's guest, and we'll see you all next time. Take care. Be kind.